Greetings. I am Psalmist Ecclesiast, and I'm trying something new. We're going to start a Bible series called Bible Without BS, where we go through the Bible without adding anything to the text, what's not there. Except, of course, for history and proven science, because that's not BS, that's legitimate stuff. So today we're going to be going through a portion of verse 1. That's, yeah. And the reason for that is I want to start by debunking a few BS or some BS that people have about Genesis that stops them from accepting the text as it is. And of course, they pertain to the authorship of Moses. So just a few things to as a foundation. The Torah is another name for the 5 books of Moses. It's also called the Pentateuch. Alright, so the first thing we can say is that the 5 books of Moses themselves tell us that Moses wrote. So in Exodus, the verses are listed here where God literally tells Moses, write this down, or write for the people to know. So that's there. Moses was writing according to the Torah. Furthermore, there are passages within the actual, like the rest of the Bible, that tells us that Moses wrote content that is referenced within the actual 5 books of Moses. I'll be focusing on mainly the first one, Genesis 17, because we're talking about Genesis. And here God is saying, or Jesus is saying, Moses gave you circumcision, but that is not from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. Now, circumcision was given to Abraham, introduced in Genesis 17. And Jesus here he is saying, circumcision was given to Abraham through Moses. In other words, written down by Moses. Other passages are more specific and more concrete, you can say. If you say, well, maybe not, maybe not. But if you look at it, that's what Genesis 17 is saying. Or that's what John 7:22 is saying. Written down by Moses, or given through Moses, but it was given to Abraham. Other passages, when it's saying, have you not read in the book of Moses, and it says specific content, that is, we have Exodus, we have Leviticus, we have Numbers, and there's quite a few in Deuteronomy. Now, I didn't list everything. If you want a more complete list, here is what I found. So these are all the places that I found where God is specifically, or where Moses is being referenced as the author. And it specifically says the content, and that content you can find written in these passages. You can look at them at your own time, take a screenshot, pause the video, go for it. There's furthermore other passages where I wasn't able to identify what the exact passage is being referenced. It's just saying that Moses actually wrote. Now, going on to the credibility of Moses a little bit. When people say, could he actually have written all of that? Was he actually the best candidate for it? Well, first of all, he was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptian. He had the best education that the world could provide at that time. So he definitely knew, the history. He definitely knew how whatever writing style existed at that moment. he knew how to write. Furthermore, Exodus 33:11 tells us that Moses and God spoke face to face. So, in other words, instead of speaking through dreams, visions, and through other ways that God spoke to prophets in the Old Testament, God spoke audibly to Moses. And Numbers 7:89 confirms that Moses would go into his tent or the tabernacle of meeting, and he would speak to God audibly, hearing the voice of God. So in the verses up here that we read, where God tells Moses, write this down, God told Moses audibly to write, and then he also told him what to write. So even though Moses wasn't alive during the times of Genesis, he had a primary source of someone who was God. So he wrote Genesis and the others by dictation. Going on a little bit, I just want to quickly address some verses that people claim as evidence of why Moses couldn't have written. So Genesis 12:6, it says, at the time the Canaanites were in the land. The bold are the phrases that are in question. That's just the statements. During the time when Moses wrote, Canaanites were in the land. Genesis 14:14, when it talks about as far as Dan, that's not talking about the tribe, that's talking about the city. In Genesis 22:14, when it says, as it is to this day, that's how it was during the time when Moses was writing it. And in Genesis 36:31, before there reigned any kings in Israel, in the previous chapter of Genesis, in Genesis 35:11, God promises to Jacob that kings will come from his line. So it's already been established that yes, there will be kings in Israel. And in Deuteronomy 17, God tells Moses, and Moses writes down the rules and statutes of how kings are to behave when they eventually come. So Moses knew that there would be kings, and then it's already been identified in the previous chapter that yes, kings will come. Now I want to talk a little bit about the Hebrew alphabet, just shortly, because to me, it opens up levels of understanding. It helps to, yeah, to better understand. Because I have heard people claim that, the way the Hebrew language is, that the Old Testament has some inaccuracies. I want to introduce a different concept, that the opposite is true. So, the Hebrew language, I would say, was in some ways the perfect language for the Old Testament to be written in. And that is because not only is the Hebrew alphabet literally like an alphabet, meaning every single symbol has a certain sound associated to it. So it's by seeing Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew, people knew how to pronounce a certain word. But also it is numeric, meaning every single letter has a number associated to it. Similar to how Roman numerals, you have, the X is 10, the V is 5, the I is 1, the C is 100. Same thing here. So it's alphabetic, it's numeric, but also it's pictographic, meaning that by looking at the letter, by looking at the symbol, people knew what it meant. In English, we don't have that. I mean, the word cat does not look like a cat. The word dog doesn't look like a dog. But in ancient Hebrew, it's been kind of lost in modern Hebrew. But when Moses was writing it, the combination of the different symbols together told people reading it what the meaning was in itself. And you have the meanings here, it's on the right side here. When these meanings combined, when these letters combined, the summation of the meanings told people this is what it meant. So yes, Hebrew does not have any spaces between the words. Yes, it doesn't have any vowels, or modern does, but ancient Hebrew didn't have any vowels. It didn't stop them from knowing what the text meant. And with the pronunciation, how did they know what how the word was pronounced with the vowels? It's by oral tradition. So that's where we have the two names of God, Yahweh and Jehovah. The consonants are the same. In Hebrew, it would have been Yehovah or Yahweh. That's where we have that differentiation, but the meaning remained the same. Whether Yahweh or Yehovah, it's still God. And here's a little another side note. People claiming that Hebrew couldn't have been the language just because it couldn't have existed at that time. Hebrew came there's some archaeological evidence that have been found in 1999. A slate was found, or inscriptions dating back to the time of patriarch Joseph. And archaeologists like Douglas Petrovich have found that ancient Hebrew was derived not from the Phoenician alphabet, but from Egyptian hieroglyphics. And there we have what the ancient Hebrew was, the and how that has changed over time to the Egyptian, and then how what transitionary letters there might have been. And here they are right here. But this dating back to before the time of the Phoenicians tells us that Hebrew was likely the first alphabet. And in the book that Douglas Petrovich wrote, The World's Oldest Alphabet, he gives archaeological evidence and explains all this. There's not just that one tablet that was found. There's lots of different inscriptions that have been found in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt, saying that during the time of Joseph and during the time of the Egyptian captivity, the Jews were already writing. There's also the film Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy, which talks about that as well. And there's an article by Bruce Bauer in Science News that also explains things. But putting that aside, all right, so we are done. Let's get down to it. We've laid the foundation, hopefully debunked some BS that people have about the book of Genesis. So let's try to now accept and go into the text as it is. The moment we've all been waiting for. So in Genesis 1:1, we read, "In the beginning, God." And we're going to pause right there. That's all we'll get through. So in Hebrew, El is one God. Allah is two gods. Elohim is three or more. And in here, in the beginning, God, the word for God is Elohim, meaning three or more gods. In the beginning, three or more gods. Now, what's interesting is that all the verbs for Elohim, meaning the verbs associated with the word Elohim, they are in the singular tense. So you have a plural noun with a singular verb. Seems kind of contradictory. But here, right from the very first verse, we have a trinity established. The word created here is bereshit, which is in its singular tense. And if you take a look at Genesis chapter 1 and throughout the entirety of the Bible, whenever you see Elohim for God, the verbs associated to it are in the singular tense, meaning three or more gods acting and performing action as one. So right from the get-go, it's being established. You got at least three acting as one. And it's always been that way. So maybe confusing to some of the scholars, but it's been established right from the get-go. Another interesting thing is that Genesis 1:1 starts with the notion that God already exists. In the beginning, God. It doesn't say, it doesn't talk about any origins of God or how God came to be. It just says, in the beginning, there was God, and that God then created the heavens and the earth. So God already existed. And there are other Bible passages that talk about God already existing. In Micah 5:2, it says that, well, it's talking about Jesus Christ here. This is it's in the Old Testament, but it's a prophetic verse of Jesus being born, or the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. Saying, "Oh, you Bethlehem Ephrathah." Ephrathah is it's like the old town Bethlehem. From you will come the one who is to be the ruler in Israel, whose coming is from old, from ancient days. The King James Version, it says, from everlasting, or from everlasting to everlasting. You have two Hebrew words here that mean not just old, but like infinite ancient, meaning from eternity. Isaiah 9:6 identifies Jesus as the everlasting Father. Again, Jesus himself identifies himself that before the world was, he existed. So that's the second form of the Trinity. God is establishing himself, or Isaiah is establishing, saying the Lord is the everlasting God. And his understanding, well, it's unsearchable. There is no limit to the knowledge of God, or to his characteristics. The psalmist David says, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. In other words, not just from eternity, but take eternity and multiply it by infinity. That should give you a little glimpse. Going on, we have other verses. Deuteronomy saying the eternal God, he has everlasting arms. Genesis 21:33, Abraham says, you are the everlasting God. Habakkuk, we have, again, the prophet Habakkuk says, are you not the everlasting God? And in Revelation 1:8, Jesus says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, who is, who was, and is to come. And this who was meaning literally was no beginning. To better understand this a little bit, let's take a look at how time works. If that doesn't make sense logically, let's try to understand it logically and scientifically. Now, it helps to understand how time works. So let's get into this a little bit. According to the National Science Institute, let's see. Yeah, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So, according to government research, there's an article that they wrote, and they have two quantum clocks, quantum atomic clocks. There are two of them in the world, and they are in different elevations. Now, these clocks, they are dependent on the atomic atmosphere that is around. You can say the electromagnetism of the Earth. You can't get more accurate than that. And they are slightly different. One ticks slightly faster than the other. And the reason for this is gravity. So the higher something is in elevation, the more gravity affects it, and gravity affects time. It's the whole concept of Einstein's theory of relativity. And if you've seen movies like Interstellar, that's the whole concept behind it. Velocity and mass is affected by time. Sorry, time is affected by velocity and mass. How fast something is traveling, and also how big it is. Because how big it is affected by the gravity, oh, according to science. Now, God, He doesn't have velocity. God doesn't have mass because God is spirit. And those who worship Him worship in spirit and truth. A spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. Because God does not have flesh and bones, He doesn't have mass. Light, which has like the smallest, I believe they're like photon particles, or maybe even less. But light has this is the smallest mass that exists within our universe. God doesn't have any kind of mass whatsoever. That's why when they say the speed of light, but God doesn't have mass, and He doesn't have velocity. Therefore, He's not affected by gravity. And scientifically speaking, God would not be limited or affected by time. The next thing I want to take a look at, speaking about in the beginning God, is Jesus. So in Hebrews 1:5, and Hebrews 1:5 quotes Psalm 2:7, when it says, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." And some may think, wait up. What does that mean? The understanding that biblical scholars have is that it's Jesus is identified of having no father, that's without father, mother, or genealogy, meaning he didn't have like a start date. He didn't have a point to where he began existing. That's already established in the Bible. So how is this reconciled? It's that the Son always existed in the Father, and God at one point decided to take a section of Himself and call that section the Son. So it's not like God giving birth. No, no. It's God taking a portion of Himself and saying, this portion, you're going to have a specific function. I'm going to call you the Son. We read, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So the speech, the Word, we'll get into this more next time. But a section of God, God calls that the Son. Because again, without a literal birthing father, without a literal birthing mother, without a genealogy, Jesus Christ always existed. And in Hebrews chapter 1, we're told that Jesus is the manifestation of the image. Let me pull it up very quickly. Just give me one quick moment. In Hebrews chapter 1, that he is the radiance of the glory of God. And it's verse 3. He's the brightness of his glory, the express image of his person. So he is God. He's not, you can say, like, yes, he is, as in Genesis 1:1, where we read about the Trinity. So yes, it's separate, but they work in such perfect unity that looking at one, you see the entirety. And Jesus tells his disciples, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. The relationship between the Son and the Father is like that of a son and a father. And why did God do that? I believe of possibly of symbolism to help us understand God to a better degree. Now, I want to be careful not to get too far away and not to add too much that's and not to add stuff that's in the text. So I'm going to be kind of wary of the next thing I say. But if we take a look, right, we have family, we have other things. A lot of it tends to work in threes. Can we understand the Trinity? I myself don't have a perfect grasp of it. All I know is that Genesis and the Bible tells us three or more gods working as one. Now, on top of that, them working in that perfect unity, we have the whole creation. We'll get to the creation a bit. We'll get into the creation more in detail as we continue with our series. But Jesus was there, or the Son was there. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Identifying that, you know, again, no starting point for the Word. It was always there with God. And all things were made through the Word. And without the Word, nothing was made that was made. Colossians 1 says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Again, with the whole firstborn, that's the meaning. That he is, firstborn also has a meaning of importance. It doesn't say that Jesus was created. God is not created. It just says that he is the utmost importance. In that Hebrew culture, the firstborn was like the heir. There was a lot of meaning given to the firstborn. And Jesus being born, he's the first, you can say, the most important of the creation, of all that is around within the group of creation, because he is God. Now, creation was made through him. He was not created. Hebrews 1 tells that God spoke through prophets and other things, but then God spoke through Jesus Christ, through whom he created the world. So when we're going to be addressing, we'll start tomorrow with Genesis 1:1, we start talking about the creation, all of that. God the Father decided to do that through the portion of himself that he identified or dedicated as the Son, as Jesus. And not only were all things created by Jesus, but 1 Corinthians chapter 8 tells us that the Father, from whom all things and for whom we exist, through Jesus Christ, all things also exist. Through whom all things are sustained, it is another way to phrase it. Through all things consist, or all things are sustained by, and through whom we exist. So to this day, it's not the Bible doesn't give the idea that God just created everything, lifted up his hands and said, all right, there you go. Go do your thing. But to this day, everything is still sustained by God, sustained by Jesus. And that is where we'll end for today. Hopefully that gives you some precious nuggets, as people say, some spiritual food to start your day by.